Hello, and thank you for tuning into this webinar. My name is Candace Williams, and I'm the Director of Policy Research and Strategic Initiatives at the New England Board of Higher Education. And I'm joined today by Charlotte Pizer, a Policy and Research Analyst at the New England Board of Higher Education, and Jason Judd, the Executive Director of Educate Maine. A few words about the New England Board of Higher Education, or NEBHE as we call it. NEBHE works to support the 6 New England states to address common challenges and bring action to shared opportunities in higher education and workforce development. In mid-2019, NEBHE launched Upskilling New England, bridging the gap between educators and employers, with support from Strata Education Network. We convened stakeholders from across the region to identify the need for upskilling and challenges related to implementing such programs, to reveal best practices in developing and delivering upskilling programs and partnerships, and bolster such efforts with state policy. We plan to share our findings through this webinar with a particular focus on Maine. In the coming weeks, we will release additional webinars with partners from other New England states. The white paper on which this presentation is based was largely authored prior to the onset of the COVID-19 global pandemic. While the implications of the findings we'll share today have always been significant, we believe that they are of greater import now more than ever. Among our discoveries, we note that the populations most in need of upskilling are the least likely to receive such opportunities. The economic shock caused by the spread of the novel coronavirus has only accelerated the vulnerabilities of these individuals, most notably and underemployed, low-wage and hourly workers throughout the country and New England. Roughly 22 million jobs nationwide have been lost in the last month, and the Federal Reserve estimates that job losses could top 47 million before the end of the current economic downturn. For the sake of comparison, only 8.6 million jobs were lost in the Great Recession. Today, business leaders predict that the pending recovery will involve a more rapid acceleration in automation and fundamental shifts in the way that work will be conducted. We have yet to understand what the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic will be on our lives, nor do we fully understand how our state and federal governments will respond in terms of financial support for education and training providers or policies on job creation. If we use the Great Recession as a barometer, we can estimate that higher education institutions and other educational providers will likely bear much of the weight for preparing individuals to go back to work and fill new types of jobs. In New England, unemployment rates peaked at 9% in 2010, and two-year colleges experienced an 8% increase in enrollment. Notably, this period also represented an inflection point where the number of sub-baccalaureate program completions in demand-driven sectors such as biomedical sciences, computer science, and precision production more than doubled across the region. It is possible that we could see similar patterns arise in the near future as the U.S. economy recovers from the coronavirus outbreak. Certainly, colleges and universities must display a degree of nimbleness that exceeds the efforts of prior decades. They will have to respond to the needs of a broader array of students, including adult learners, who are likely to turn to short-term online methods of gaining industry-validated knowledge and skills. At the same time, collaboration between higher education, employers, and local and state governments must turn a new page to act quickly. Mitigating the likelihood of a full-blown recession or even a short-term depression, as well as mobilizing workers who can help fight off the coronavirus, will depend on prioritizing the acquisition of in-demand automation-resistant skills and credentials by New England's out-of-work individuals and at-risk incumbent workers. There are a number of factors at play alongside the impact of the pandemic on our regional higher education landscape and economy. The New England states as a collection are unique for their concentration of colleges and universities and the role these institutions play in local communities. Additionally, the age and demographics of the region call for new strategies to meet the fast-changing needs of the labor market and ensure that the region remains a top choice for people to live and work. With fewer high school graduates entering the college and career pipeline, it's important that we optimize existing human capital, and underemployed adults, groups traditionally underserved by higher education and workforce training, and recent immigrants. Across the region, higher education institutions, workforce training providers, and employers must work together to develop a system of learning that meets individuals where they are and allows for the continuous upgrading of skills and knowledge. In doing so, we'll be bridging the gap between the supply and demand of adults with needed post-secondary credentials. In Maine, 40% of adults have an associate's degree or higher, while up to 65% of jobs require a post-secondary credential. The share of folks with post-secondary degrees in Maine is on par with the national average. However, Maine's attainment falls a bit short when compared to the other New England states. Rhode Island is the most comparable to Maine in this regard. And for many reasons, this has made sense. Maine historically has a unique economy with a mix of industries that require quite specialized knowledge and skills, which aren't necessarily gained through higher education. Relative to the rest of the country, Maine has a high share of jobs and industries related to boat building, fishing, logging, and paper mills. Yet these fields have been in decline in recent times. And we see occupations requiring college degrees growing quickly, particularly in the fields of IT, management, and healthcare, of course. The number of jobs in computer systems design, for example, are expected to grow by 29% by 2029, or 2,000 new job openings. The average wage for these jobs is over $100,000 per year. To make sure that Maine can respond to the global forces that are changing the mix of growing industries and available jobs, we need to increase access to and completion of post-secondary credentials for nearly 200,000 Mainers. And remember that figure because we'll come back to it. In terms of access, we must be conscientious of geography. People whose highest degree is a high school diploma are more likely to live in Oxford, Somerset, and Piscataquis counties, whereas those who hold an associate degree or higher tend to live in the Portland area and along the coast. Of course, there's a correlation here to the distribution of jobs and therefore how institutions are able to partner with employers or offer students work-based learning opportunities in emerging fields, for example. But Mainers across the state need tools to adapt to the changing needs of the labor market and ensure career longevity through access to lifelong learning opportunities. And the call for career advancing education among adults in Maine is quite strong. 2 in 5 perceive the need to pursue additional education. And I'd be remiss not to mention that the impact of COVID-19 on people's employment status is also changing the way they're thinking about new education and training options. According to Strata Education Network's weekly Public Viewpoint survey, 55% of Americans have either lost their jobs or have had their hours or income reduced. 1 in 3 believe that they would need more education to find a comparable job. For millennials and Generation X, this belief is more pronounced than their other peers. This mirrors more general trends about the perceived need for career advancing education. The demand is particularly strong among young adults who appear to be responding to labor market demand. There's a bit of variation by attainment level as well. And now you remember that an additional 200,000 Mainers must complete a post-secondary credential to be prepared for available job opportunities. If we apply this survey data, we can count up to 224,000 adults who perceive the need for additional career-connected education. Digging deeper allows us to confirm additional hypotheses. As population growth among white people slows and the state becomes more diverse, education and training opportunities should respond to the needs of Black and Hispanic individuals. 1 in 2 Black people in Maine see the need for additional education, while 7 in 10 Hispanic people in Maine do as well. Furthermore, individuals working in healthcare, life sciences, and IT are apt to see the need for more education and training. So the question is, how do colleges and employers alike respond? There's a lot of opportunity to set the conditions now to launch Maine businesses into the future and build on Mainers' entrepreneurial spirits. Even at this relatively early stage in the life cycle of the global pandemic, many of the conditions linked to the recommendations that we'll share already exist. For example, we now know that individuals can adapt really quickly to digital methods of teaching, learning, and working. Current and prospective students' expectations of higher education are changing. Deficiencies in our labor market have been revealed, such that the need for transparent education and career pathways is newly clarified. And we can no longer ignore the inequities faced by people of color and low-wage hourly workers. We believe that upskilling is a key strategy to meet the needs of current and future members of our workforce, our employers, and our higher education institutions. And with that, I will turn it over to Charlotte to discuss our work and our findings.
All right, thank you, Candace. So you're probably wondering, what is upskilling? In the fewest words, to upskill is to gain additional or alternate skills that will translate to advancement in the workforce. The Aspen Institute's Upskill America initiative defines upskilling by 3 key opportunities and outcomes: employer training, credentials, and college degrees. Upskilling via employer training refers to employers providing or partnering with education institutions to provide retraining and upskilling opportunities for incumbent workers. Upskilling can also take place by way of attaining a credential of value or a verification of an individual's skill level or qualification by a third party, like a trade association. Lastly, an individual may upskill by attaining a college degree, ideally with the financial assistance of his or her employer. Upskilling is important across all sectors. For workers, upskilling can directly translate to increased wages and/or a promotion. For employers, upskilling is an important tool to enhancing work product and retaining workers. Additionally, it is more cost-effective to upskill an incumbent worker than to recruit a new employee. Educators benefit from upskilling because by forming partnerships with employers, they not only assist their students in job placement, they also make themselves a more sustainable institution because through innovative program development and successful partnerships with industry, institutions widen their application pools. Policymakers play a crucial role in upskilling through creating policies supportive of the aforementioned entities and, most importantly, our labor force. But also by creating policies that support the creation and sustainability of upskilling programs, policymakers open educational opportunities to more citizens who, in turn, make greater contributions to the economy. The next question is, where should upskilling take place to be most effective? According to the Strata Consumer Insights data, New England adults are extremely likely to enroll in education and training through their employer. The next most desired source of education is community college, then four-year college. So if employers develop upskilling programs or partner with education providers to develop upskilling programs, workers are more likely to take advantage, acquire higher level skills, increase their wages, contribute more to their employer, and increase output, become a better consumer, etc. In September 2019, NEBHE, with the support of the Strata Education Network, convened a thinkers meeting. At the meeting were representatives from colleges and universities, employers both large and small, state policy, industry associations, workforce boards, and other stakeholders. Through robust discussion around best practices and opportunities in the upskilling space, we came up with 3 models for upskilling, which can of course be tailored to individual businesses of varying sizes. As we've emphasized, the implementation of these models is of increasing importance in our current circumstances. Partnerships between employers and education providers will be especially pertinent when we begin to return to normalcy and rebuild our economy. The first model is in-house upskilling. This model works best for large employers with significant resources to dedicate to building and sustaining education and training programs on site. Companies like Amazon and JetBlue have strong in-house upskilling programs, and a bit closer to home, Chimbro Institute in Maine is an exemplar of the in-house model. I'll let Jason talk a little bit about Chimbro's success through their institute.
Thanks, Charlotte, very much. So the Chimbro Institute here in Central Maine is a great model for in-house upskilling, where basically the employer, this large construction company that does work all across the United States, is able to bring back employees for upskilling specifically in the Central Maine area, run them through classes, workshops, hands-on training to be able to upskill them for advancement in particular occupations. It works really well. They actually serve thousands of their employees through this physical center in Pittsfield and are leading the way with in-house upskilling efforts here in Maine.
Great. The second model is a direct employer to institution partnership. Here, an employer seeks the partnership of an institution or vice versa to develop a curriculum or program which can be customized or already existing that directly correlates to the employer's skills gaps. The Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Massachusetts partnered with Bunker Hill Community College to do exactly this. This partnership, called the Employee Career Initiative, delivers free prerequisite courses for careers in allied health. Beth Israel developed these courses with Bunker Hill, who offers them on-site, meaning workers do not have to leave the hospital to take classes. This model can work well for mid-sized employers and community colleges that have the capacity to develop customized programming when necessary, or to travel to deliver on-site programs. The third model is an industry-led partnership where an intermediary, which can be a workforce board, an industry association, or the like, helps to connect employers and educators and build and sustain partnerships and subsequent upskilling programs. The Eastern Advanced Manufacturing Alliance, called EMA, is an excellent example of this. EMA is a collective of manufacturing businesses in Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island, and has established itself as a nonprofit organization and intermediary for member organizations and partnered education providers. EMA reviews its community college partners programs program offerings to ensure the alignment with current manufacturing industry needs. It also advocates for supportive policies for the advanced manufacturing workforce pipeline and is a resource for best practices for employers and education providers. Since integrating employers into the educational pipeline is not a practice that's universally implemented by educational institutions, we've narrowed the role that employers play into 4 concrete areas. The first is assessing workforce skills gaps so that they may accurately articulate openings for upskilled or upskilling employees. The second is to form partnerships through one of the models previously articulated or build an educational program in-house. The third is to invest in or elevate existing high-quality, effective upskilling programs. With this investment comes the responsibility to advertise upskilling programs to employees. We learned from the meeting we hosted in September that many employers who offer tuition benefits do not actually track who is using them. And much of the time, employees do not even know that this benefit exists. And on top of all of that, tuition reimbursement is not always the most helpful benefit because it does not mitigate the upfront cost of college. So we have to rethink this more traditional benefit and elevate the more innovative models that we've touched on. Lastly, employers should standardize skills language. This will be most effective when developed in collaboration with education partners so that job skills and course outcomes are aligned in such a way that the pathway from an education and training program to a job is clear both to the student, the institution, and of course the employer. I'll turn it over to Jason to talk about some opportunities and best practices in Maine.
Great, thanks, Charlotte. So we've heard a lot about this exciting report and that NEBHE has brought forward, and I really wanted to take a couple of minutes and talk about how this relates and how upskilling in general relates to the work that we're doing here in Maine. So we heard a few minutes ago about the importance of so many adults getting additional training and degrees to prepare for the jobs of the future. And we have a coalition of organizations here all working together on Maine's state attainment goals. So by 2025, we have a goal of 60% of Mainers will hold education and workforce credentials that position Maine and its families for success. We have over 100 organizations working on this goal very closely with folks in the administration and across all branches of government, all collectively working together to meet this goal by 2025. We want to make sure that families, students, adults really have the training that they need to access these high quality jobs that we mentioned earlier in our presentation. And the state's actually adopted this goal into statute and is holding us all accountable each year to growth toward this particular goal. So it fits in really nicely with the conversation we've been having about the importance of upskilling and the role of the employers as well as training providers to work on this goal collectively. And this is what we're doing here in Maine, state attainment specifically. Relating to Maine Spark and our state attainment goal, we also have a grant through the Lumina Foundation, an All Learning Counts grant, which has really been a great model that has brought so many different partners together to look at how we can help recognize learning that might be happening outside of the traditional space and make sure that learning is stackable and that learning is valued and can actually translate into degrees and sort of advancement, both in the higher education system as well as in the employer system. So just wanted to offer that as an example of an existing project that's really across so many different partners, all working together with the support of a national foundation, as well as some other pilots that have a All Learning Counts grant in other locations across the United States to figure out collectively how upskilling can fit in with this work and how we can recognize learning that happens outside of the traditional space. I also thought it was really important to talk about the state economic development strategy, which was recently published by the governor's office and a number of the departments, specifically the Department of, the DECD department. What I've done is really pulled out a couple of parts of this report, because this report was done by really collecting information from hundreds and hundreds of business leaders, higher education leaders, a variety of different people across the state. Worked on this report to think about how Maine could continue to develop the economy and what our 10-year plan needed to look like. And you'll notice that a number of these items that I pulled out really relate very closely to upskilling and this work that we've been talking about in the last part of our presentation, which is thinking about systems that are stackable, thinking about micro-credentialing, thinking about increasing online learning and flexibility so that folks can access this training, whether they're on the job working for an employer, whether they're preparing for a job that they're going to be applying to that might be new, but really that theme of partnership, collaboration, employers, intermediary partners, training providers, kind of all working collectively together with the support of the government in order to advance upskilling and training opportunities. Thanks, Charlotte. And here are a couple of examples of those partnerships happening and a couple that are Maine specific. One of those is the Maine Quality Centers Project, which is a project of the Maine Community College system that there's really a partnership program between the community colleges as well as employers to develop upskilling initiatives in partnership. So funding comes through Maine Quality Centers, is approved by the legislature and the governor's office to fund that. So it's public funding that offsets many of the costs for upskilling specifically. And we've seen this program work really well with the community college system with both very large employers, small employers, and employers all working together. So that's one resource that already exists that's working really well here in Maine. The second is working really closely with the Maine Department of Labor. We have a strong apprenticeship program, and many of the employers that we've mentioned in many of the models use apprenticeship and the support of the Department of Labor staff to develop upskilling programs right within their employers. We also see some of these intermediary partners become the facilitator of apprenticeship programs and programs for the DOL, and kind of serve as that bridge between the training providers and the employer providers with support and funding from the Maine Department of Labor. And then another employer that's done really great work in employers kind of leading the way with upskilling is Maine Health, which is one of our largest employers here in Maine, and healthcare, which is such an important sector right now. And they have so many opportunities to bring in new employees right now. They're hiring so frequently that not only do they partner really closely with many of the higher education systems and the short-term training providers, but they've also developed their own programs in-house, sort of boot camp programs, if you will, where they're training folks like phlebotomists. Folks often start maybe in working for housekeeping or dining services, things like that, but they have an interest in actually getting into more healthcare occupations. So they actually transition employees from some of these other roles into these in-house training programs for upskilling into healthcare specific occupations. So just another example of a great employer here in Maine that's taking advantage of partnering with all these different training providers, but then also when there isn't a likely partner, that they're also willing to stand up and say, we can do this, we can help design it, and then replicate it to help serve the adult population.
Thanks so much, Jason, for that spotlight on all that's going on in Maine. It's certainly an exemplar in our region. We are now going to move into some recommendations for state policy solutions. In our white paper, we've articulated 3 buckets of policy recommendations: delivery models, partnerships, and state policy. For the purposes of this webinar, we will focus on the policy recommendations. It's important to note here that we created these recommendations with an equity lens. And in fact, we believe these recommendations actually facilitate increased equity and inclusion in upskilling programs. The first policy recommendation is to implement policies that require validation of prior learning or expansion of validation of prior learning. By recognizing and documenting prior learning, whether through work experiences, military experience, or previous academic experience, education providers shorten time to in-demand credentials, which workers can achieve through upskilling programs. We're going to focus on college credit for heroes, which is specifically for military veterans, because we believe this model can be translated and scaled for non-military individuals. College Credit for Heroes was initiated in 2011 and is intended to maximize awarded academic credit for military experience. CCH is built on 2 primary pillars: an extensive network of participating schools, currently at over 50 colleges and systems in Texas, and the development of accelerated curricula. The Texas legislature allocated $5 million to the launch of the program in 2011, and it was made permanent in 2015 through SB 806. CCH has completed thousands of evaluations of military experience, which has resulted in an average of 25 college credits per veteran. Codification of this initiative has significantly increased the participation of institutions, which has in turn increased student participation. The second policy recommendation is for policymakers to implement incentives for employers to prioritize upskilling as a key business strategy through state-issued grants or tax breaks. An example is the Massachusetts Workforce Training Fund, a program out of the Massachusetts Executive Office of Labor and Workforce Development, to which organizations can apply for grants up to $250,000 to train current and newly hired workers in topics like project management, software and IT skills, and machine setup and operation. The model works well because not only is it government supported, businesses must pay membership dues and for-profit companies automatically pay into the fund. So there's widespread knowledge of the resource. The last policy recommendation is to develop accessible, transparent, and stackable credential pathway models so that all stakeholders can easily understand how upskilling programs translate to promotional structures and/or post-secondary credentials. In 2019, Vermont enacted H533, which requires the Department of Labor to collaborate with post-secondary education and training providers, government agencies, and employers to recruit adults into educational training programs, locate funding to subsidize locate funding subsidies for participants, and map pathways from high-value credential programs to high-quality job outcomes. There are not results from this initiative just yet since the law was enacted so recently, but we will provide those for you when they emerge. As a conclusion, we have some questions for all of you listening to consider. What barriers exist at the state level that hinder the development of upskilling programs? Who are the champions in Maine and perhaps your region? Employers, policymakers, institutions that can help scale this initiative. How can Maine policymakers or policymakers in your region create the conditions to enhance transparency of pathways from credentials to career? What incentives can Maine or your state or region offer to employers, education providers to develop and implement upskilling programs? And that concludes our webinar. We would love for you to reach out to any of us with any questions or comments or feedback, and we will see you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.